shock faded, and the crime scene was cleared, the real terror of the Black Dahlia case began to take shape, not in blood or violence, but in uncertainty. Los Angeles expected answers, and quickly. The police faced enormous pressure from the public, the media, and city officials to deliver a suspect, a motive, and a sense of closure. Yet from the very beginning, the case resisted order. It was as if the crime had been designed not only to destroy a life, but to dismantle every system meant to explain it. The investigation expanded at a speed rarely seen before. Detectives worked around the clock, following leads that stretched across the city and beyond. Elizabeth Short's life was reconstructed piece by piece, but the picture that emerged was incomplete and fractured. She had lived lightly, leaving few solid footprints behind. She stayed briefly in many places, trusted people easily, and moved on before strong ties could form. What had once been a matter of survival now became a devastating obstacle. There was no single location, no consistent routine, no clear circle of acquaintances that investigators could rely on. Her life, like the case itself, was scattered. Suspicion fell on hundreds of individuals. Some were connected to Elizabeth directly, others only vaguely. Men who had been seen with her, men who had spoken to her briefly, men who fit a psychological profile, men whose professions suggested knowledge of anatomy. Doctors, surgeons, medical students, mortuary workers, anyone with skill and access was scrutinized. Yet each suspect dissolved under investigation. Alibis were confirmed, evidence failed to appear, timelines did not align. The deeper the police dug, the more the ground seemed to collapse beneath them. The precision of the crime haunted investigators. This was not violence born of panic or rage. It was controlled, deliberate, and methodical. The killer had taken time. He had cleaned the body, removed all blood, and posed it carefully. He had chosen a location that ensured discovery while revealing nothing about the crime's origin. These details suggested intelligence, patience, and confidence. Whoever committed the murder believed he would not be caught, and as days passed, that belief seemed justified. False confessions flooded the police department. Some came from disturbed individuals seeking attention, others from people who wanted to insert themselves into the growing legend. Each confession forced detectives to relive the details, to verify facts, to compare statements against evidence that was already thin. Every false lead consumed precious time and energy, dragging the investigation further into confusion. Instead of narrowing the search, the case expanded uncontrollably, becoming less defined with each passing week. The media played a powerful and destructive role. Newspapers competed aggressively for headlines, often publishing rumors as facts and exaggerations as truth. Elizabeth Short was transformed into a character, a symbol, a spectacle. Her image was reshaped to fit narratives that sold papers rather than served justice. She was portrayed as mysterious, reckless, immoral, anything that added intrigue. This distortion subtly shifted blame away from the killer and toward the victim, as if understanding her life could somehow explain the violence inflicted upon her. As public interest intensified, so did the pressure on police. Mistakes were made, evidence was mishandled, crime scene access had been poorly controlled in the earliest hours, allowing contamination and interference. Reporters had entered areas meant to be secured. Photographs circulated freely. Potential clues were compromised before their value was understood. These early failures would later haunt the investigation, creating gaps that could never be repaired. With time, darker theories began to surface. Some believed the killer was someone powerful, protected by influence or wealth. Others suspected connections to Hollywood's hidden world, a place of private parties, secrets, and unspoken rules. Whispers of cover-up spread quietly, fueled by the lack of progress and the disappearance of promising leads. No evidence ever confirmed these theories, but their persistence reflected a deeper truth. People had lost faith that the system could deliver justice on its own. Years passed, and the case slowly transitioned from active investigation to cold file. Detectives retired or were reassigned. Witnesses aged or died. Physical evidence deteriorated. What remained were boxes of reports, photographs, and unanswered questions. Each time the case was revisited, hope briefly returned, only to fade again. New suspects emerged, usually named by authors or independent researchers, convinced they had uncovered the truth. Books were written, documentaries produced, theories argued endlessly. Yet none provided proof strong enough to close the case. Elizabeth Short's identity continued to erode beneath the weight of speculation. She became less a person and more a symbol of horror. Her voice was lost entirely. No one could say with certainty what she felt in her final days, what she feared, or whom she trusted. The absence of her perspective allowed others to speak for her, often inaccurately. Her life became defined solely by her death, and that transformation was perhaps the cruelest outcome of all. What makes the Black Dahlia case uniquely disturbing is its permanence. Most crimes, no matter how brutal, eventually reach a conclusion. An arrest is made, a verdict is delivered, society moves forward with the comfort of resolution. This case offered none of that. It remained open-ended, a narrative without a final chapter. The killer's success in evading capture ensured that the fear he created would outlive him, embedded in history rather than confined to a prison cell. Los Angeles continued to change. Neighborhoods transformed, streets were renamed, the vacant lot where Elizabeth was found disappeared beneath development. Time reshaped the city, but it could not erase the memory of what happened there. Each new generation encountered the story as something both distant and immediate, historical yet unsettlingly relevant. The idea that someone could commit such an act and vanish without consequence challenged the belief that evil is always visible, always traceable. As decades passed, the case became less about solving a crime and more about confronting failure. The failure to protect a vulnerable person, the failure to preserve evidence, the failure to separate truth from sensation, the failure to deliver justice. These failures accumulated silently, turning the Black Dahlia into a symbol not only of violence, but of absence of answers, absence of accountability, absence of closure. In the end, Elizabeth Short was left suspended in time. She never grew older. She never escaped the role assigned to her by tragedy. While everyone connected to the case faded into obscurity, her name endured, bound forever to a crime that defined her against her will. The killer's identity may never be known, but his impact remains undeniable. He succeeded in creating something that could not be undone, a story that refuses to end. And so the Black Dahlia case stands as a reminder that some horrors do not conclude neatly. Some crimes do not resolve themselves into lessons or justice. They linger, unresolved, passing from one generation to the next like a quiet warning. Elizabeth Short's life ended in violence, but her story endures in silence, a silence filled with questions that may never be answered, and a darkness that time itself has failed to illuminate. The morning of January 15th, 1947, unfolded quietly in Los Angeles with no sign that it would become one of the darkest days in the city's history. The air was cool, the streets calm, and the empty lots scattered across the city looked no different than they had the day before. In one such vacant area, undeveloped and largely ignored, the stillness was broken by a discovery that would shock not only the city, but the entire nation. A woman walking with her young child noticed something pale lying in the grass. From a distance it appeared unnatural, stiff, and oddly placed. At first glance it resembled a discarded mannequin, the kind used in shop windows and often thrown away without much thought. The object lay unnaturally straight, separated from its surroundings, as if it did not belong to the land beneath it. As the woman moved closer, unease replaced curiosity. The shape was too precise, too deliberate. The longer she looked, the harder it became to deny the truth. What lay before her was the body of a young woman, placed openly in the lot as if meant to be found. Elizabeth Short's body had been cut cleanly in half, separated at the waist with shocking precision. There was no visible blood soaking the ground, no signs of violence nearby, no indication that the crime had occurred in that location. The absence of chaos made the scene even more terrifying. It felt staged, controlled, and intentional, as though the killer had carefully arranged every detail before leaving. When police arrived, the mood shifted immediately. Even experienced officers, hardened by years of exposure to violence, were visibly shaken. It was not a crime of passion, not a spontaneous act driven by anger or desperation. The condition of the body suggested planning, patience, and a disturbing level of calm. The cuts were clean and exact, indicating skill and knowledge. Elizabeth's body had been washed, removing nearly all traces of blood. Whoever had done this wanted to erase evidence, yet paradoxically wanted the body to be seen. The positioning of the body was deeply unsettling. It was placed in a way that drew attention, ensuring discovery. There was no attempt to hide it, no effort to bury or conceal. The killer had chosen a public location, but one quiet enough to avoid witnesses during placement. This balance between secrecy and exposure suggested confidence. The murderer was not afraid of being caught. In fact, it seemed as though he expected to walk away unnoticed, and he did. As word spread, reporters descended on the scene almost immediately. Cameras flashed, notebooks filled, and speculation began before the investigation had truly started. Within hours, the story dominated newspapers across Los Angeles. By the next day, it was national news. Elizabeth Short was no longer an unknown young woman drifting through the city. She became a headline, a photograph, a symbol of horror. The media gave her a name that would echo for generations: the Black Dahlia. The nickname captured the public's imagination, but it also transformed the case into something larger and more dangerous. Sensationalism replaced sensitivity. Details were exaggerated, rumors printed as facts, and Elizabeth's life was dissected publicly in ways that stripped her of dignity. The focus shifted rapidly from what had been done to her to who she was rumored to be. This shift would later complicate the investigation, blurring truth with narrative. As investigators examined the body more closely, the full extent of the brutality became clear. The autopsy revealed that Elizabeth had endured extreme suffering. This had not been a quick or accidental death. It was prolonged, deliberate, and cruel. Each new detail added another layer of horror, deepening public fear and outrage. People across the city began to lock their doors earlier, avoid empty streets, and question the safety of their surroundings. Los Angeles, a city known for sunshine and dreams, suddenly felt dangerous. Then came the letters. Several days after the discovery, the Los Angeles Police Department received an envelope addressed carefully and deliberately. Inside were Elizabeth Short's personal belongings, items that only the killer could have possessed. The message was unmistakable. This was not a coincidence, not a cruel prank. It was a declaration. The killer wanted recognition. He wanted to prove that he was beyond reach. More letters followed, each reinforcing the same chilling message. The sender taunted authorities, demonstrating awareness of the investigation and confidence in his ability to stay hidden. These communications transformed the case from a horrific murder into a psychological battle. The killer was no longer silent. He was watching, responding, and controlling the narrative from the shadows. For investigators, the letters were both a breakthrough and a curse. They confirmed that the murderer was still engaged, still nearby, still capable of striking again. Yet they offered no concrete clues, no fingerprints, no traceable leads. Each letter heightened public fear and intensified pressure on the police. The city demanded answers. The police had none. The challenge of reconstructing Elizabeth's final days proved overwhelming. Her transient lifestyle made it nearly impossible to trace her movements accurately. She had stayed in multiple locations, interacted with many people, and left few reliable records behind. Witness accounts conflicted. Timelines overlapped and contradicted one another. Every attempt to create a clear sequence of events collapsed under uncertainty. Media interference further complicated matters. Reporters often arrived before investigators, contaminating scenes and spreading misinformation. Witnesses, influenced by headlines, altered their stories or exaggerated details. False tips flooded the police department, overwhelming investigators and diverting attention from legitimate leads. The sheer volume of information created noise rather than clarity. What troubled detectives most was the absence of mistakes. Crimes of such brutality often leave behind traces, carelessness, panic, evidence overlooked in haste. This crime did not. Everything about it suggested preparation. The killer had anticipated investigative methods and taken steps to counter them. It was as if he had rehearsed the aftermath in his mind long before the crime itself. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. The initial urgency gave way to frustration. Each lead ended in disappointment. Each promising suspect failed to connect conclusively. The city's fear transformed into unease, then into a quiet dread. People realized that the person capable of such an act had not been caught and might never be. For Elizabeth Short, the discovery of her body marked the point at which her humanity began to disappear beneath the weight of horror. She was no longer discussed as a person with dreams and struggles, but as a case, a symbol, a story to be told and retold. Her name became inseparable from the manner of her death, overshadowing everything she had been before. The vacant lot where she was found would eventually return to silence. Grass would grow back, life would continue, but the moment of discovery could not be erased. It marked the instant when the city lost something intangible, its sense of safety, its belief that such evil belonged somewhere else. The horror of that morning did not end with the removal of the body. It lingered in unanswered questions, in the fear that followed, and in the realization that some crimes are designed not just to kill, but to haunt. The discovery of Elizabeth Short was not merely the uncovering of a murder. It was the beginning of a mystery that would never release its grip on the city, a moment frozen in time where horror stepped into the open and refused to leave. After the discovery and the media storm that followed, the Black Dahlia case entered its most disturbing phase, not because of what was known, but because of what could never be proven. As weeks passed with no arrest, the fear in Los Angeles deepened into something heavier and more unsettling. People began to realize that the killer had not made a single mistake serious enough to expose himself. He had vanished back into the city, as if he had never existed at all. The police investigation grew into one of the largest in the city's history. Hundreds of detectives, officers, and specialists were involved at different stages. Thousands of tips were logged. Every detail of Elizabeth Short's life was examined repeatedly, yet the picture remained fragmented. Her movements in the days before her death could not be pinned down with certainty. Witnesses contradicted each other. Some swore they had seen her alive after the time she was believed to be dead. Others insisted she had been in places she could not possibly have been. Each contradiction widened the cracks in the case. Suspects emerged and faded away one after another. Some were men who had known Elizabeth briefly, others had never met her at all but fit psychological or professional profiles. The precision of the crime continued to trouble investigators. Many believed the killer had medical or surgical knowledge. This theory led police to question doctors, surgeons, medical students, and hospital employees. Background checks were conducted, alibis were scrutinized, yet no evidence ever crossed the line from suspicion into proof. Every trail ended in uncertainty. False confessions complicated matters further. People from across the country claimed responsibility for the murder. Some were mentally unstable, others sought fame or attention, hoping to attach themselves to a story already growing into legend. Each confession had to be investigated thoroughly, draining time and resources. With every false claim, the real killer remained safely hidden, untouched by consequence. As months turned into years, public trust in the investigation began to erode. Many believed crucial mistakes had been made in the early hours after the body was found. The crime scene had not been properly secured. Reporters and onlookers had entered areas that should have been restricted. Potential evidence had been contaminated or lost forever. These early failures created holes that no amount of later effort could repair. The media continued to shape the narrative, often irresponsibly. Elizabeth Short's image was distorted beyond recognition. She was portrayed as reckless, immoral, and mysterious, as if her character could somehow explain the violence inflicted upon her. This narrative subtly shifted blame away from the killer and onto the victim. Instead of asking who committed the crime, the public was encouraged to speculate about who Elizabeth had been. In doing so, her humanity was slowly erased. Dark rumors began to circulate, rumors of powerful men, secret lives, and deliberate cover-ups. Some believed the killer was protected by wealth or influence. Others suspected connections to Hollywood's hidden world, where scandals were buried and reputations guarded at all costs. No solid evidence ever confirmed these theories, but their persistence revealed a deeper fear, that the truth was being deliberately kept out of reach. As time passed, the case officially went cold. Detectives retired, evidence aged, witnesses died. Files were boxed up and stored away, labeled but unresolved. Yet the story refused to fade. Writers, journalists, and amateur investigators resurrected the case again and again, each convinced they could uncover what the police could not. New suspects were named decades later, often with compelling arguments, but never with proof strong enough to close the case. Elizabeth Short became trapped in this endless cycle of speculation. She stopped being remembered as a young woman with hopes and struggles, and became instead a symbol of unresolved horror. Her life before her death was overshadowed completely by the brutality of the crime. The killer's anonymity ensured that attention remained fixed on the victim rather than the one responsible. What makes the Black Dahlia case uniquely haunting is its lack of resolution. Most crimes, no matter how horrific, eventually reach an end. An arrest is made. A sentence is delivered. Society regains a sense of balance. This case offered none of that. It remained open-ended, leaving behind a wound that never healed. The absence of justice became part of the horror itself. Los Angeles continued to grow and transform. Streets were renamed, buildings replaced empty lots, generations passed. Yet the story endured, resurfacing whenever people confronted the uncomfortable reality that some evils escape punishment entirely. The Black Dahlia became more than a crime. It became a warning, a reminder that darkness does not always announce itself and that intelligence and planning can sometimes defeat justice. Elizabeth Short's killer may have died without ever being identified, or he may have lived an ordinary life, surrounded by people who never suspected the truth. That possibility is what unsettles people most. The idea that someone capable of such calculated cruelty could disappear so completely challenges the belief that evil always leaves a trace. In the end, the Black Dahlia case is not just a mystery, it is a failure of closure, a story without an ending. Elizabeth Short never received justice, and the silence surrounding her death continues to echo through history. Her name survived while the truth faded, and in that imbalance lies the deepest horror of all.